And so, again, my name is Megan Kirby, Dissemination and Implementation Specialist with Language Dynamics Group. And I'm here this evening to welcome Courtney CC Clark, my friend and colleague. We've done research together, we've worked together for many years, actually in person, and no longer, sadly. I've graduated. And so Courtney's at the University of South Florida, and she is the go-to. Our her content area expertise is in this area, the narrative and expository language measure flowchart. She has done the research and the work, so I'm so excited to have her here today, and we're very lucky actually to have her here today, speaking to us. And we have her for an hour. So you will be getting a copy of um, these handouts at the end. So stay on to the end. And the CEU certificate of attendance form will be available at the end of this webinar. But again, I'm going to turn it over to Cece and take it away. I'll just monitor the chat. All right.
Sounds good. Thank you, Megan. I'm so happy to be here with you all tonight. I just want to start off by thanking Dr. Megan Kirby for providing this platform for me to share a little bit about the research that's been going on in our little neck of the woods over the last, I don't know, like 4 years or something like that. There's just been so much great work going on in our research lab, and it feels really good personally to be able to share that with an audience who can hopefully put it to good use. So I started off tonight by asking people where they're from and what their content area is or their professional backgrounds. And I see a whole bunch of SLPs, which is awesome. I love SLPs. I wanted to get an idea before we start because I am not a speech and language pathologist. I am actually a school psychologist, and I'm actually starting my internship right now. So I just wanted to start off by giving you guys a little bit of background information about me and how I found myself into this wild world of academic language development. As Megan mentioned, I'm a research specialist. I worked full-time as a research specialist under Dr. Trina Spencer over the past about 4 years at the University of South Florida at the Right Path Research Center. And there I was hired primarily to work on the ALPS study, which ALPS stands for Academic Language of Primary Students. And we were interested in exactly that, the academic language of students, and specifically in kindergarten, first, second, and third, for third grade, interested in looking at those emergent features of more sophisticated language and hopefully identifying ways to be able to target specific skills that are going to be facilitative of later reading comprehension and academic achievement. So we gathered language samples from kids all over this massive county in Tampa, Florida, where we live. And we created a really large corpus of academic language of primary students in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. So what I've been doing what we've been doing over the past maybe 2.5 or 3 years, once we got the data, was to transcribe it and then to start scoring it. And so we developed, and I'm going to get more into detail about the flowcharts, but that's what the flowcharts were developed for. As I said, and I literally just started my internship 2 days ago, so bear with me if my brain's a little fried. But that's my current area, professional area. In a past life, I was a English as second language teacher in the Czech Republic, and I also was a reading tutor for several years as well. So that's kind of how I found my way into this world of language and language development. So tonight we're gonna start off by, I'm just gonna be talking to you a little bit. I wanna give you some background knowledge about what kind of motivated our research that we've been doing, and also some of the findings that I found in my, I just finished my master's thesis, which was looking at these two flowcharts. So I wanna give you some information about what we found with that. I'm then gonna talk a little bit more in depth about the NLM and ELM flowcharts, the different features and everything that comes along with the package. My hope is that it will be very useful to you all as speech and language pathologists. I wanted to give a mini tutorial of how to actually use it, how to actually decode language samples using these flowcharts. It's not my goal for you to be like proficient in using these flowcharts by the end of tonight. I think that's going to take more training. But this will at least give you an idea where we're headed with it. And I can connect you with the resources to be able to go more in depth should you so choose to. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about possible applications of the flowcharts, future research questions, and we'll have a little Q&A. All right, so let's get started with the background here. So what is academic language? I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one with all of you, but academic language is defined differently by different theorists, but there's a general consensus that it's really the language of schooling. It's the language that we use in school specifically to acquire and express knowledge. We can better communicate more abstract ideas, more complex and technical ideas using academic language to foster this kind of critical thinking and allow for more precise understanding of academic content. Academic language is largely discipline specific, so it sounds different, for example, in chemistry than it does in business, right? However, there is some shared content, words and structural features that are that exist across disciplines as well. Overall, the variations that we find in different types of academic language are, number one, by form or structure. So academic language varies at the word level, at the sentence level in terms of grammar, and then also at the discourse level. So looking at those more paragraph level patterns. Academic language varies according to its function or purpose. And also, one thing that's, I think, often overlooked is the context of the elicitation. So not only like what is the purpose of that language or of that language sample or of that productive language, but what gave rise to it specifically. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it's important to know that texts that serve different purposes, they generally take on distinct forms in relation to their purpose. So why do we need tools for measuring academic language? Well, several research studies have been published to date that show a very clear correlation between emergent academic language features in early childhood and reading comprehension in later childhood. So what that tells us is that academic language is probably pretty important for literacy and learning. Therefore, there's a need for precise measures of academic language so that we can analyze this construct and hopefully be able to intervene, right? Current methods of assessing academic language are insufficient, in our opinion, for the task of really understanding academic language because it has multiple dimensions and it is varied according to purpose, and it just has a lot of layers, we'll just say it that way. There needs to be comprehensive discourse-specific measurement tools that can be used to inform instructional decision-making, to really understand it in a way that's going to be able to intervene. And I don't want to get too far into it, but in my research, what I found was that there's really like two major categories of assessments of academic language. One is the standardized test approach, right? And with the standardized tests, whether they're norm referenced or they're criterion referenced, typically what you're finding are, proxy measures where you'll ask a student a number of questions that are supposed to give some kind of indication of what their ability level is. What we normally see these being used for are like for, eligibility, seeing if students are eligible for different diagnoses, and they're great for that. They're reliable, they're valid. You can use them for diagnosis. There are drawbacks associated with that. It's pretty limited in application in terms of informing instruction, which I'm sure all of you as SLPs are very well aware of. There are some criterion referenced assessments that can be used for progress monitoring, like the cubed assessments. If any of you are familiar with those are also from Language Dynamics Group. But other ones are really only appropriate for screening purposes or for eligibility decision making. And then we have structural assessments, which involves language sampling. And those are really wonderful. They're time efficient, they're resource efficient, and they're really pretty easy to use, to be able to sample language. However, they do require a lot of training and some resources to interpret. And our biggest thing is that there's a lack of standardization for these procedures. There are some, and that's especially, well, I'll get into that more. But so that's kind of where we were coming from, is we needed these tools ourselves to understand academic language. So we were like, hey, we're going to create them. So that is what the NLM and ELM flowcharts are. NLM stands for narrative language measure, just so you guys know, and ELM stands for expository language measure. And what they are they're discourse-specific scoring rubrics that can provide an overall measure of a student's skill in producing different types of academic language. In this case, narrative academic language and expository academic language. The flowcharts can comprehensively assess lexical features, grammatical features, and discourse features. And if you look down at my little concept map here, you can see we've got narrative discourse and expository discourse. And then what those are beneath those titles are the three subscales of the flowcharts. You've got language complexity, which looks more at your word and sentence level features. Then you've got narrative structure, which is looking at your discourse or paragraph level features. And then we also have an optional writing conventions measure to look at things like spelling, capitalization, things like that. And an expository discourse, exactly the same, with passage structure instead of narrative structure. So the flowcharts also include standardized elicitation and transcription protocols. You can elicit language samples through a retell context or a individual generation context, and I'm going to get more into what those procedures look like. The items that we included in the flowchart were chosen based off of really three primary things. One was we really looked at the corpus analyses of academic textbooks and academic language. The work of Doug Biber was really instrumental in the creation of the flowcharts. We also looked at what does the research say? What are the important features of expository and narrative research? And we also pull some elements from the Common Core standards, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So the research done to date on the flowcharts, in 2013 and 2018, there were 2 intervention studies that were published, and these studies used the NLM flowchart only to look at the changes in children's oral and written narrative language in response to an intervention. So what they found, this wasn't directly looking at the NLM flowchart, but they did look at reliability indices, and they found that they found acceptable scoring agreements and reliability correlations for the NLM flowchart in both of those studies. This 2022, this is my thesis, and in this I looked more specifically at both the NLM flowchart and the ELM flowchart, looking at their psychometric properties. We had a massive corpus of language samples, almost 8,000 language samples that we transcribed, and then we went and we scored all of them using the flowcharts. For my thesis, we only looked at the oral language samples. So we also have a corpus of written language samples, but I just focused on the oral language samples. And what we found was that the NLM flowchart, we found adequate reliability measurement. We calculated those, and we also looked at measurements of validity, so looking at internal consistency, and we found that it was appropriately consistent internally, concluding that those 2 subscales for oral language, language complexity, and narrative structure are appropriate for use with K through 3rd graders. The ELM flowchart was a different story. We're still running some secondary analyses at this time, but the preliminary ones that I published about are that the language complexity subscale was found to be adequate, but the passage structure, which is looking at those discourse features, that one didn't really pass the bar that we set. And we have some different hypotheses for that. But at this time, it's still in the developmental stages, what I can say about that subscale. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. I did not, like I said, we did not look at the writing conventions measure because we were only looking at oral samples with this. So we don't, more to come on that. And the next step is really, we want to know how the flowchart can be used in applied settings. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. All right, so let's talk about the components of the flowcharts. So as I said previously, language samples can be elicited using a retell procedure or a generation procedure, or both, which is what we did in our study. We had a protocol where we first elicited 2 retell samples, and then we elicited 2 generation samples. So I put the pictures on here to give you an idea. So we had a battery of photo sets. We had a battery for narrative photos and we had a battery for expository photos. The narrative photos, as you can see here, there's 2 examples at the bottom here. They depicted some kind of like problem and solution, and in 3 kind of steps. And we asked students to tell a story about those. So with the retell context, it would look something like this. You would show 3 photo sets of these different narrative photo, story starters. Ask the student to select which set they want to talk about, and they choose one. You say, okay, you put the other ones away. And then for the retell, you would read aloud a story that corresponded with the chosen photo set. Now the stories, we already have the stories, the retell passages pre-made for each of these photo sets. And what's great about them is that they're very strategic. We wanted, they're differentiated by grade level, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. And they have strategically placed structural features and vocabulary words that are appropriate to that grade and age level. The information, the expository pictures depicted themes that were from the Common Core state standards. So we scoured the Common Core state standards and we found themes that were present in the curricula for kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. And we chose photos, and then we would, instead of reading a story to them, we would read them an informational passage about those photos and ask the student to retell the passage. So we did that, twice. So two retell samples, let's say 2 narrative retell samples, okay? And then after that, we would have the students generate their own story or information, depending on if you're eliciting narrative or expository about the pictures that they selected. So ultimately, you'd have 4 samples in each genre. You'd have 4 narratives, 2 retell, 2 generation, and 4 expository, 2 retell, 2 generation. And here's just a little snippet to show you. This is the elicitation script on the right. It's all laid out there. All these materials are available to you, and I'll give you the link at the end. And on the left, that's an example of the retell passage for growing plants. Oh, and we also have fidelity checklists available too. So that's available on the website as well, I believe. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail as far as the transcription procedures, but just know that we have them, and we took them largely from corpus linguistic standards. Again, we consulted with Doug Biber on this to be able to ensure that we were using best practices in transcription. And there's a lot. It's like a 4-page document. It's a lot, but we were able to train, right, Megan? We were able to train quite a few undergrads to be able to do it. So, yeah.
You're a great trainer. Possible. You're a great trainer, though. So, let's also say that.
Yeah, it was a good team effort. Okay, so this is the NLM flowchart. Ta-da! It's kind of hard to see here, but there are 3 subscales. You can see there's the language complexity on the left bottom there. There's the language complexity has 6 items. There's the narrative structures on the bottom right there. You can see there's 7 items and then kind of like a little box at the bottom. And then the writing conventions is actually on the first page up there above language complexity. And again, that's just for the written sample, so it's optional. You can use the subscales together, or you can use them in tandem. And we did find that the reliability and validity indices were were accurate, whether you did it by subscale or together as like a single score. So I guess what I mean when I say that is like you'll be able to, yeah, maybe that's something we can discuss at the end, but you should be able to pull information from each subscale independently, should you so wish to. The ELM flowchart, it's organized the same way. You've got language complexity and passage structure on the bottom there, and then the optional writing conventions at the top of the first page. Again, I just want to reiterate that at this time, only the language complexity subscale for the ELM flowchart is research validated, right? So that passage structure is kind of like a use at your own risk. I believe that it's a very helpful tool, or could be, especially in terms of like working with students and identifying areas of weakness. But just so you know, like a global, like, oh, their passage structure scale score was a 12. I don't know how valuable that is at this time. More to come on that, I guess, in future years. All right, so where are we at with time? Let me see. Okay, we're at 7:28. I'm going to go through the scoring procedures. I'm going to go a little quickly. A lot of this will probably be familiar to you all anyways, I'm guessing. I know I'm only going to be looking at the NLM flowchart right now, just because that is the one that I feel most confident about sharing with you guys. And just know that the language complexity subscale is very similar for narrative and expository, the NLM and the ELM. There's only one item that differs between the two. So if you know how to use language complexity on one, it'll be easy to use language complexity on the other. Okay, so I've already told you all this. All right, so let's first look at the language complexity items. And the way we do it is we highlight these items. So when we transcribed it, we had it in a Word document, and we just used the highlight function in the Word document. So with relative pronouns, what we're looking at, we're looking for our relative pronouns. We basically train people to identify the relative pronoun and see if it's if one of these pronouns is listed right after the noun. And if it does, you count it. And it maxes out, this one maxes out at 3, as you can see here, 3 points. So three is the ceiling. If it's a repetition or stutter, you count it anyways. And the reason why is that Dr. Spencer calls it a blunt instrument approach. It's very difficult to train people who don't have content area expertise in this area to identify some of these structures. So we just have them kind of use a blunt instrument to be like, okay, if you see these words and it meets these criteria, then count it, even if it's a stutter or repetition, just to simplify it a bit. So that's relative pronouns. The next item is verb noun modifiers. Again, the ceiling with this item is 3. So with this, we're looking for descriptive words, adverbs and adjectives that provide descriptive information. And what's important with this item is the location of the modifier. With noun modifiers, we're only looking for those that come directly before a noun. Actually, it doesn't have to be directly before the noun, but it has to be before, somewhere before it. It can't be afterward. With verb modifiers, these ones can be counted whether they're before or after the verb. It can come before or after. So, you know, for example, he ran angrily and hurriedly after him. With this one, you see the modifiers are afterwards. That would count. And there's certain criteria for how many points to award with these, but that's the general idea behind the verb noun modifiers item. Vocabulary, we're looking for less common words, idioms, analogies, metaphors, and similes. There's some examples here, and this little snippet is taken directly from the flowchart. So really, you can actually just use the flowchart. You can like print it out and just have it and like have your language sample and be like filling in the circles and calculating it that way. After you've studied the manual and you feel confident using it, you don't necessarily have to go back to the manual all the time. You can just use the flowchart. At least it was designed to be used that way. So the ceiling here is 3. And The idea of the less common words we took from the concept of tier 2 words, which we define here as not commonly used by K through 3rd students, but appear more frequently in text. And they can be used across domains and topics. We have some criteria here for determining whether or not a word is less common. For example, is there a simpler way of saying the word the child could have used? We also had them with the retell samples, we had them reference back to the retell passages, because as I said before, there are strategically placed vocabulary words in those passages, and we want to make sure that we're awarding points for their reuse of those complex words. Like, definitely want to do that. But we can kind of compare as well with the level of complexity in those passages and see, like, is it commensurate with those embedded words? And if so, we definitely want to award points for that. And we also use the living word vocabulary list. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. I'm certain some of you are. We use that as well to see what the percentage of students who are using that word are. And if it was 85% or above, we would consider those common. And if you're interested, I can share that resource with you at the end. And so we have some examples and non-examples here. And yeah, I know that also idioms like as a dog or like a hawk, those kind of things, we would also want to award points for things like that as well, if it's an analogy or a metaphor or something like that. All right, the next item is temporal ties, and this and the next item, causal ties, these are what we know in the language world as words that signal subordinate clauses. So this is very consistent across the research on complex academic language, is that multiple clauses, with a main clause and multiple subordinate clauses, is one of those hallmark features of academic language. So we definitely want to pick up on these, especially in our analyses. And how we include it in the flowchart is look for any of these. There are these 6, and I know that there are more temporal tie words, but these are the ones that we awarded points for. And in our training, and there's more about this in the training slides, there's like more examples and non-examples and things like that. But we did include some information about what a subordinate clause is and how to identify it and things like that, so that, just because someone sees the word as, they don't automatically award points for that. They need to be able to identify the main clause and the subordinate clause, which took a little additional training, but people got it. Like all of our staff were able to catch on and identify those with relative ease. Causal ties, again, these are also words that signal subordinate clauses, and these are the ones that we chose to include, the most common ones, because so that, since, unless, although, and even though. The only additional training we had to give beyond this was the so that rule. We explained that the use of the word so is not automatically causal, and we taught people to look for whether, if they were to put that afterwards, does it still make sense? And if it does, then it signals a subordinate clause and you can count it. And if it does not, then you should not count it. And with a little bit of additional training, we were able to get everyone on the same page with that. But other than that, it is a total blunt instrument approach, as I described previously. If you see these words, you award a point. Any of these words, 1 per point. The final item in language complexity is dialogue. So looking for 2 speakers or two or more instances of speakers talking to one another. And the ceiling on this item is 2 points. So you'll notice all the other items up until this point had a ceiling of 3. This one has a ceiling of 2. And this one's pretty straightforward. You're just looking for any instance of dialogue. In our transcriptions, we don't include quotation marks. And the reason we did that was because we also ran analyses through SALT, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with on this webinar. So we knew that we wouldn't be able to run those through SALT. So we just made all of our lives easier by not including it. But you may choose in your transcription to include that. And that would be perfectly fine. Okay, so let's check our time. Okay, our first example here, actually in the sake of time, I'm just gonna run through this. Feel free to look back over it, but this is just an example to kind of show you how this looks in an actual language. This is an actual language sample from our corpus. All right, so moving on to narrative structure. So the first thing we teach is that each utterance can count towards only one narrative structure element that contributes to episode complexity. I'm actually going to get into that on another slide. I'll just say in general, narrative structure can definitely be tricky. To be able to know what content fits with which element. And so it can get a little dicey. And I would say probably with this, like definitely need some additional work and training and working with examples and samples in order to feel confident with this particular subscale. We also use the conservative rule. So when in doubt, go with the most conservative choice and the most conservative score. All right, so the first item is character. And basically what you need to know with this one is there's different ways to earn points for character, depending on whether you're eliciting a retail sample or a generation sample. It's easier to get points on this one for an independent generation. So if you use a proper noun for anyone with a generation, you're gonna get two points. But you have to have two proper nouns to get 3 points. So that can be a little tricky, but this is just looking at, are they using general nouns or are they using proper nouns for the characters and showing that content knowledge of character in their samples. Here's an example here for a retail and for a generation. Those are just examples to give you an idea of how to award points depending on the elicitation context. The next item is setting. So with this, what we're looking for is information about the time, which can be general or specific, reference to the time of day, month, or year, the activity, so whatever the character is doing at the beginning of the story, and the location, which is any description of where the problem occurs. So for this example, you're seeing last night, I walked upstairs to my room. So we have time, activity, and location. Bam, one sentence, they got 3 points for setting right there. Okay, and the next 4 elements that are on this subscale are what contribute to what's known as a story episode. And this concept draws heavily from the work of Glenn. I'm sorry, I'm like blanking on the name right now. But it's research from like the late 1970s that looked at it's from the narrative research literature and showing that there's specific elements that are like cross-cultural in storytelling. There's just these certain elements that are present in like every story, and that sense has been widely adopted. Stein and Glenn, I believe, has been widely adopted, and just kind of like common knowledge that these are the specific story elements that we're looking for. So these 4, problem, plan, attempt, consequence, and ending, all contribute to episode complexity. And episode complexity is, to what extent did they hit all those bases? And if they hit all the bases, they get awarded more points. So the first one here is problem. And you can see the shaded circles here means that those are going to count towards episode complexity. Problem is just the situation or issue the main character encounters. So, this is the first picture in the photo set, right? So the boy can't find his shoe. Her head was spinning. She felt sick. The baby's crying, whatever the problem is. Here's an example of that. The next one is plan attempt. So you can see these max out at 4, points. You can get 4 points if you have 2 planner attempts. It's the same with problem. If you have two problems in your language sample, you can actually make 4 points on that item. And same with this. So your planner attempt is whatever action is performed by the main or secondary character. That's an attempt to solve the problem. And it is the direct cause of the consequence, which is the next item in the sequence. It goes problem, plan attempt, consequence, and then ending. And usually they're temporal like that. They go in order like that. So for example, like when he couldn't find his shoe, plan attempt would be he asked his dad for help. When she didn't feel well, she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. These are all attempts to solve the problem. Here's an example in an actual sample. And as I said before, the next item would be consequence. Again, you can max out at 4 points on this one if you have 2 or more consequences listed. And this is whatever the result is of that attempt to solve the problem. So they make that plan, they make that attempt, and then this is the result. So he asked his dad for help, and then bam, he found his missing shoe in the toy castle. She closed her eyes, tried to feel better, and then bam, when she woke up, she felt better. So this is whatever came right after that plan attempt, whatever was the direct consequence. And here we have our example as well. Ending is this one. Ending and consequence can get a little confused at times. The ending is what happens after the problem has been solved, and it usually comes after the consequence, but it's not the immediate resolution of the problem. The immediate resolution of the problem would be the consequence. So with the example of the little boy who lost his shoe, he lost his shoe. He asked his dad for help. Then he found his shoe. That's the problem, plan attempt, and consequence. And then he put on his backpack and left for school. So that's what happened after the problem was solved. And that's the ending. And you can, with that, you can get up to 2 points. Let me go back, I think. Yeah, you can get up to 2 points for a complete and clear ending, just a single one. And incomplete and unclear would get 1 on this one. And again, like in the full training, there's a lot of examples and non-examples to kind of show you what that looks like in like actual real language samples, which are very messy. And there's our example there, and you can see. All right, the next item is sequence, and this one's it's a little subjective. Our reliability index on this was the lowest of all the items. It's just looking for the whether there was a clear beginning, middle, and end. So what was the sequence like of those different 4 episode complexity elements? And they either get a 0 or a 2. It's like a yes or a no with this. And yeah, we have an example, non-example, and there's more of those as well in the training manual. Emotion. So were there any emotions that were included for how the character or characters feel? And you can get more points for more emotions, and less points if it's like less clear. So like there's like some verbs that indicate an emotion but aren't necessarily emotions, like, oh, she liked them. She liked them. She liked them would be like a feeling word, but it's not an explicit emotion. So that would only get 1 point, as you can see here. General emotion or emotional behavior only gets 1 point. So that's what that one looks like. And then finally, there's the episode complexity. So as I said before, what you would do is you'd look back at your flowchart, you'd look for all of those shaded numbers for problem, plan attempt, consequence, and ending. Let's say your kid got straight 4s, you got 4 for problem, 4 for plan attempt, 4 for consequence, and they had an ending in there too. So they got a 2 for ending. Well, then you can see here at the very bottom of this chart, it says 4, 4, 4, 2, and then there's an 8. So that kiddo would get a score of 8 for episode complexity. All right, so that's kind of how you do that. You add those up and you find that episode complexity score. Oops. All right, so let me see my time. It's 7:46, so I'm going to skip over writing conventions. Like I said, these are not yet like research validated, although we did use best practices according with the research literature, but they are here for you. And they involve some calculations of the number of words written and things like that. But I'm just going to skip over it just for time's sake and just jump right into applications. So with the NLM flowchart, these are the kind of follow-up questions that I specifically have, and I would say our research lab has in general. We're really interested in the extent to which the NLM flowchart is user-friendly by like actual practitioners in the field. What modifications do we need in order to make this instrument the best for use in applied settings? Can it be used for progress monitoring? Can it be used to inform interventions? Is it helpful? If not, like what would be more helpful? How can we modify? How can we make it better? We're also interested in how this narrative academic language varies with respect to different student characteristics. And we're also interested in looking more at these elicitation contexts. You know, like I said before, our elicitation procedures our protocols very like laid out. It's very standardized. I tend to think it's very good. It's very comprehensive. But, you know, playing around with that a little bit and seeing, you know, if you had a group together and you list, like, how does that change the sampling? You know, what kind of results do you get with that? So those are the kind of things that would be very, very fruitful to investigate. With the ELM flowchart, I put a little blow up of the passage structure here. So this is the one I admitted to you all. It did not meet our criteria. We are doing more analyses, but it did not meet our criteria in terms of reliability and validity. However, we did look only at the language of kindergarten, first, second, and third graders in this study. And, you know, there's a possibility that these features just simply aren't there in the language that was elicited, you know, that the kiddos maybe are too young to be creating these types of language features. And so, you know, we're really interested in what does it look like with fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders, you know, even up to high school. You know, are we finding, you know, patterns with using these criteria and these scoring criteria? Also, I will say in our analyses, we included four of these items. You can see there's 6 items. We only included 4 of them. We did not use information units because its scale is different. You can see you can get up to like 30 points for information units, right? And actually in the research literature, information units is like the most important feature of discourse specific elements. So it generates the most information, for lack of a better word, about those specific features of language. So, you know, at this time, like I said, we're doing more analyses and we're going to be looking at that more deeply. But I would say for anyone who's interested in using this specific subskill of this, I would say that information unit's there, and we have a lot of directions in the manual about how to score those, how to identify them in language samples. I would be really interested to see how useful that is for people, because we really don't know. We've just been scoring away, but we don't really know very much about how useful it is or like how much it can tell us. So I'm really interested. I really think that has legs. You know what I mean? The information unit definitely has legs. So I'm interested to see where that goes. And that's all I have. I think I'm like right at 750. Yeah. So I included on here, there's a little link to RightPath, which was where our research lab is housed. There's my email. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I think I probably didn't hit everything I said I was going to hit in this, so you probably have questions or whatever, can follow up with me. And I am happy to announce that all of these resources are available at trinastoolbox.com, and I have a link there for you as well if you're interested in looking at those yourself. So, and I've got my references here at the end too, and I think that's it.
Go back to the links. Yeah, there you go. That's love. Well done. Woo. Like in a nutshell. Thank you, because this is a lot of information. So those flow charts and all the resources, again, are going to be located at www.trinastoolbox.com/research_ALPS, ALPS.html. So again, if you have any questions too, reach out to Cece, and it's cclr33@gmail.com. Cece, we have a question here. Oh, let me post the attendance certificate for y'all. We do have a question here in which I believe Tiffany asked, she said that she has found the NLM flowchart, she found it in the cube. She uses it with the retail, but I've never found a chart that indicated what the benchmark scores are and what those scores mean. So Tiffany, I'm going to follow up with you and ask you, are you looking for the flowchart, like benchmark scores for the flowchart?
I think I know what. So there's a test called the NLM Retail, which is part of
The
the
listening retail, yeah.
Yeah, that might be. So that is a criterion reference assessment that does have benchmarks. Right now with the flowchart, we do not have benchmarks. We're not at that point yet. We hope to build towards that, but we are not there yet.
I think because students' language is kind of all over the place. And again, like as much as you all got in the research, just like one of the first studies ever to just like, what are they like?
Yeah, this was more of an explorative study, and adaptations can like now be made, and as a result of looking at our findings, like what are the things that we're seeing, what do we need to look for, but yeah, like Megan said, like they're all over the place. Like language samples, productive language samples are like you really don't know what to predict, so it's really 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 hard to find like patterns across samples. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, and if it doesn't, then reach out to CC or reach out to me. I'm looking for references with the scores. Okay, so yeah, we're not going to have anything that's going to tell you what the score. What you care about on the flowcharts are actually the content. You know, is the student able to retell a story with a complete episode? Well, on the flowchart, you would know that. And is it complete and cohesive and coherent? Whether it's expository or narrative, and you would know that because of this permanent product, right? The sample that you have, if you were audio recording it, you can transcribe it, or the audio recording is then used to provide this permanent product, which is the flowchart, which you're listening to it and you're scoring it like as you're listening to it again. Do not recommend scoring in real time using these flowcharts, but it provides you a measure of actually reporting in like a present level performance, or finding, what do I need to have goals and objectives? Where do I need to have intervention? What does it need to target? And then you can use that like as baseline. And let's say, months from now, I'm going to elicit another language sample and use the flowchart. When you don't need the narrative language measures listening that comes in the cubed, also free, right? When you can't use it or you don't need it, right? Because the narrative language measures listening is not an expository context. It's not a writing context. So there are some things that it frees up for you. It's not a personal generation context. So when you're doing some other types of language sampling to then conduct analyses, the flowcharts actually allow you to do almost the same thing like the decision making that you are able to do in the rubric for narrative language measures listening in that listening retail. But again, that's very limited to a story retail. So the flowcharts allow you to do so much more. But again, they're not going to be normed, right? And they're not going to be benchmarked because we don't have enough information and data to provide like where are students supposed to be. So like Cece was saying, is this study is like the first one of its kind to just find out where are kids, and this again was pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. So that was like where kids were before the pandemic too. So we don't want to say the students sample like what you listed is that is impaired or anything. You can know because you're going to use what makes an evidence-based practice, right? Is your best clinical judgment, right? Your knowledge of that child, your knowledge of the context, as well as like, the fact that this tool, right, is scientifically researched and it's grounded in science, but you need all those other things. We can't just like let it be this flowchart that is the decision as to whether or not a child is or is not at or performing at grade level or performing as expected. So we're very hesitant. We like it being some kind of, I don't know, like it actually quantifies things for you. But rather than numbers, it quantifies it in terms of like the actual units, the incidents that they have a character, and to what extent is it complete and coherent, their character. So it actually provides you with better information for you to actually write IEP goals and objectives personally. Same for information retail, right? So I would love you to rather than look at what scores mean, to just look and see, like, is it present or is it not? But if you have older students, which I'm not sure, Tiffany, if you do, we would love anybody with older students, please use the ELM especially, and let us know how it works. Let us know how it doesn't work. What is clunky? What is aversive to you when you're doing it, that you're like, maybe it's those 30 information units. Or maybe it's the rhetoric, the vocabulary. We want feedback from you, especially, and by we I mean CC. We would love feedback from you, because if it's going to be a tool, right, that's used by professionals and practitioners and clinicians, great, Tiffany, good. Then what good is it if researchers make it and then it's not going to be used? Still, those are the most horrible things ever. So this is almost like pilot testing in an informal way, right? So try it, get it out there. And once you have it done, Tiffany, feel free to follow up with CC or myself, and would love to meet with you. I personally have the time, I can talk through some scores with you. So if you get some flowcharts done, set up a time with me. Now I don't have my email here. And CC, I'm just going to take that over from you. So if I have to involve you and pull you into it, but rather than you taking all these appointments, that'd be fine. But screenshot, like snap a picture, and then you can reach us at training at languagedynamicsgroup.com. Gets me so excited. CC, any final comments?
I was just thinking something.
Trying things out. Not criterion.
Oh, yes, I did want to say one thing. One of the great things I want to say about the flowcharts is that literally it takes like 30, depending on how long the kid talks for. Okay, most kids, I'm going to say on average, at least K through third grade, they're talking for like 1 to like tops 3 minutes to elicit these language samples. And like, you can get so much information, within 2 or 3 minutes. And once you like kind of know how to use these, I can learn so much about a kid in such a short period of time just by recording it. And it takes like 2 seconds to it doesn't take long to transcribe it. And then you use this, and I really feel like it's easy to use. It's much easier than sitting down and doing a woodcock. I can tell you that. And you can redo it over and over again. It's like there's a limitless amount of, especially when you're looking at the generation procedure. I mean, you're unlimited in the amount of information that you can get once you really feel confident using something like this. So it's kind of like, if anyone's familiar with curriculum-based measures, it's kind of like that. It's like a CBM. It's like a CBM for academic language. That's the way I conceive of it anyways, or, that's anyways, the goal that's in mind, and we're working towards that. I'm not claiming that we're online with the CBMs quite yet, but I have faith that we're going to get there.
I think it's in line. And I just love that comment, which Jacqueline was like, easier than woodcock, music to our ears, but it is, and it actually gives you more information and less amount of time, more information, especially, and it's also not biased towards students who are English language learners or dual language learners, right? It is not biased towards students who don't come to the table with parents who are teachers, or like any of us, and are been shoving that language nutrition from birth through 3, right? And so both parents work at night, and so maybe the language nutrition in their home during those early years hasn't been as dense and thick and high quality. The rate of speech and everything, they didn't get that, but it doesn't mean that they're impaired, right? So as soon as they get into school, they have the ability to learn, but they're not coming back with coming to us with the background knowledge, with the vocabulary, right? And so if I'm doing, I hate the Peabody for that reason. Like, who the hell knows a canoe if you live in the middle of the city? I don't know. It's so unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go through, yeah, Eiffel Tower, like.
We also made sure to use depiction in the narrative elicitation photos. We specifically used models. It was the kids of people in our research center, and we wanted to make sure we were representing different ethnicities, and the names were chosen strategically to be to have diversity included in the language that we were using as well. So and I know that there's more work being done on that. Like there's more, like this isn't like the end of all the retail passages. Like this is going to be an ongoing thing where we have many retail passages and elicitation materials, because that is one of the missing links, I think, to really putting this method to its best use, is to having more representations available to be able to access the knowledge that's already in these kids' heads. We just got to find a way to dig it out,
Yeah. So, all right. So we'll call that a night. And everybody who joined us, thank you so much. And then please, please, please use these sites to access the resources that were discussed. Please email Cece. And then I will be sending out a link to this recording so that you can go watch it again after you download the resources, and you can have access, listen to it at 2.5 speed, whatever, and go try to find the information so you can have obviously a refresher now that you have the tool in front of you, or the tools, and reach out to us if you have any questions. Okay, so we look forward to it. Thank you so much for being here and actively caring about your students and your clients, for you to take out your personal time. We're all like minds, and so you deserve some kudos. So thanks again for being here, and thank you, Cece, so much. And I will see you soon.